Welcome to the Swisspreneur Show, a podcast about startup stories and hands-on learnings from experienced entrepreneurs. My name is Sylvan and I will be your host. Today we're back in Bern for the second episode with Michael Friedrich. We're going to chat about competition. Competition is something that you will face sooner or later in your entrepreneurial career, but there's certainly no way around it. Michael and his personal stories seemed to me like he's playing chess in real life. That was very interesting and fascinating to see at the same time. So we will of course talk about how you can actually handle competition, and also closely linked to that, how you can actually identify trends and sort of see the playing field that you should get active on from a more macro perspective. We will also cover what you can actually then do if you are getting into a competitive situation, and also focus, because that's very closely linked, on the topic of the exit. Because in his second company, Michael basically created a successful exit out of a very competitive situation. So in that regard, we also focus on the strategy, what it needs to create a good exit, and the success factors that lie behind that. As always, you can also find additional content on social media, so make sure that you follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Before we get started with the episode, I would like to introduce you to SBB Startup. If you think that your company is a good fit for the Swiss Railways, get in touch with them or learn more about their startup programs at sbbstartup.com. Michael, welcome back to the second episode. It's great to have you here again.
Sure.
Today we're going to talk about competitors and how to handle or even beat them or make them acquire you, as it was in your case. So let's start with the first question. What mistakes do you see Swiss startups making repeatedly when it comes to competition?
I think it starts with having a clear understanding of how global the market is you're playing in. If it is usual, and for most tech startups, it's a global market. Global meaning the entire world, maybe not China, but at least all the rest. And then you need to be in a position to be strong enough to take it up with challengers that come from all those places, and that usually have much deeper pockets. So many times Swiss startups, they don't dare to be large enough and aggressive enough to succeed on a global level, and to plan that from the get-go.
Do you think that this is a mindset problem that we have in Switzerland?
It's just Switzerland is so small that you, when you want to expand, you immediately are in a different geography in Europe. So Germany is a different market from Switzerland. It's very different from France, not even to mention Italy or other countries in Europe. Right. When you're in the US, you have a much bigger market that is more standardized. So you can expand and multiply your business model to a much larger population. In Europe, that's not so much the case. And so you need to be much more aggressive in thinking of how your business works in other geographies as well from the start. You cannot just focus on getting it working for one type of environment and then know that this is a market that is 300 million people. Mm-hmm. But here that it actually might just work for 7 or 8, and then you need to have a different model for Germany or for France.
Sure. Do you still think that Switzerland is a good market to get started, to have your home base as a startup?
It is, because you have a lot of talent, you have good work ethics, you have great infrastructure, you have an insane quality of life. Mm-hmm. And so yes, it's a perfect place to be. I travel to the US quite a bit, and for me it's perfect to be able to go there to play.
Right. Because
if I succeed there, it's very successful. It's really potentially super big. Mm-hmm. But when I fail, I can go back to Switzerland. Whereas if I'm in the US and I fail there, I'm on the street. Right. I have no social security, nothing. And here I have everything to be safe. And so I don't understand why not more people in Switzerland are aggressive entrepreneurs, because they have such a privileged environment. They can go out and play, and if they come home, they have health insurance, social security, whatever, education. People don't even realize the privilege, what type of privileges they have.
I also wonder about the exact same question very often, and I think, yeah, you just cannot explain it. You basically you cannot fail in Switzerland.
No, you can't. You can explain why people don't move. It's because they are spoiled.
Probably.
We all have, and not enough that we need to fight for, because building a business is hard work.
Sure.
And it has impacts on your entire life, because you spend a lot of energy to build your business. But then again, it's a really great adventure.
Absolutely. And I also think a much needed adventure, because in the future, startup companies might be even more important than today.
I think so, yeah. Yeah.
In all your ventures, you basically also face competition. And I would like to start with the first venture, the Bern Bite Bears. And there you had a very interesting situation that we discussed about when we did the briefing call for this interview. You had your smartphone contract comparison platform, and in the name of your platform, you used the term handy for describing smartphone, which was, and I think still is, owned...
Nattel.
Nattel, oh, sorry, yes, yeah. It was Nattel, right. Which was, or still is, owned by Swisscom and sort of protected. And basically there, they got not very happy about you using their protected name.
So Nattel, for Nationales Autotelefon, is a registered trademark of Swisscom that they registered during monopoly days in the 80s, I believe. And when mobile phones emerged in Switzerland, that became the standard, the household term for mobile phones. Even today, people call it Nattel. Yeah. And what people don't realize in general is that this is, again, as you said, a registered trademark of Swisscom. So when the mobile phone market opened up in the late 90s, we had that platform, nattelinfo.ch, where we compare tariffs. And at the time, Swisscom was not happy with the fact that we transparently showed how expensive they were compared to competitors, and they tried to block us by taking legal measures against us because on the grounds of trademark infringement.
So how did that show? What did they do?
They actually sent us a lawsuit and ask us to stop using that trademark, because again, they were not happy to be always the last ones on the list. And we then had a nice dance with them, in a sense that we played the David against Goliath play, where we went to the media and told the media that, hey, see, we want to bring transparency into that market, much needed transparency. We are innocent 17 years old kids. And the big monopolist, or former monopolist, wants to prevent that and tries to fight us with legal measures. Please help us at least make sure that everyone knows that what Swisscom is doing. And that obviously created a lot of interest at the time. And we had a lot of media attention. We then also went to a arbitration session with them, which essentially gave Swisscom the right to sue. That's just part of how that works in Bern, a very simplified way. And that created even more noise. And then, long story short, due to that media attention, this topic got, ultimately Swisscom decided to buy the domain nattelinfo.ch from us for a price that was at the end seed investment for this for Bern Bite Bears, and allowed us to hire first employees.
I think this is an incredible story, because it really shows that you were not afraid of the competition or the lawsuit even, and really sort of, as you described it, went on a dance. But still, you were teenagers. How did that make you feel? Because this is a very, very bold move that you take, to go to the media and to really sort of pick up the game, pick up the fight with the Goliath.
Yeah, so that was a move that was spearheaded by Thomas Brönnimann, the president of the association at the time, the teacher, and Martin Lucas Andre, who saw that angle. And you're 17, what do you have to lose? It's pretty fun to do that.
But still, I can imagine a lot of people who are 17 and in a similar situation think, oh no, I better back off.
Yeah, we didn't, and we saw no need for that. We thought that there is, it's still from the time you start to dance to the moment the dance ends, there's still a lot of time, and you can still do a lot of things. And in the worst case, you just stop doing what you do. Meaning you just give up the name. That would have been the worst case scenario. We didn't cause them real damages. They've never asked. They've never threatened to sue for damages.
Okay.
They just wanted us to stop, and so that was a manageable risk.
Absolutely. So is this also how you go about these sort of competitors? I don't know, challenges, if I can call it that way. Do you sort of evaluate the risks and the upsides, and then basically decide, hey, we actually cannot lose that much, but potentially we can win quite a lot. Let's do it. Let's go for it.
We don't actively look to pick up fights. Okay. That's not the idea. That would not be accurate. But you're always, and Swisscom was not a competitor to that extent. Right. But when you work with competitors, you need to know that they can start a fight, and that is already good to keep that in mind. And but then you want to position yourself that you can still. The purpose of the business is not to fight the competitor. The purpose of the business is to win customers and to build a successful business.
Sure.
And that means just knowing your competitors so that you can position yourselves in a way that allows you to create maximum value despite the presence of competitors.
Right.
So maybe put that in a more positive way.
Absolutely.
But you should know your competitors. There's no need to be afraid of them, and just try to find a smart way to interact with them.
Yeah, makes sense. And during the time, as you said, you picked up the dance with the giant, sort of. Were there any doubts along the way where you thought like, hey, maybe it wasn't a good idea to actually pick up this dance, or were you really like, sure, hey, this is the right way to go?
When you build a business, you need to have a certain amount of ignorance, and I think that came in handy at the time.
Okay.
We didn't see any real threats.
Okay.
And there were none,
right.
Even in retrospect.
Okay.
There were no real dangers.
And then you also, in your second venture, you also had a pretty interesting competitive situation. If I understand it correctly, you had basically developed a great technology, but as you also said in the first episode, it was pretty difficult to market the first technology that you had. And then you basically also had to think about, hey, how can we actually return the money of our investors? What can we do about this?
Yeah. Let me come back to that question, sure, if you don't mind, yes, and just complete the competitive story of the previous one. Because Burn by Bears, we sold that to a competitor, where we were fighting. Comparis at the time was a competitor, and at the end we realized that selling them what we have makes them stronger and gives us a way out, so makes them willing to pay for something that we have. And that is how we had our first exit. Mm-hmm. Now with Imago, we had a similar setup in a sense that we were building these cameras to visualize blood flow, but as discussed in the first episode, it was a new market, and a lot of clinical evidence would have had to be developed to really create awareness among the physicians that this was a really valuable technology that hospitals would pay for. And so we were actually struggling quite a bit in late 2011. We had just closed the financing round, and we realized that actually, the product, the hardware, the product itself is great, the device, but it was not a good product because hospitals were not willing to pay for it. And we felt very desperate about that because we already had raised money and created a lot of hopes. And as part of that situation of tremendous pressure and also distress, we then discovered a US or Canadian company that was addressing the same customer need that we're going for with a different technology. And this company at that time, Novadac, they had already been public at the Toronto Stock Exchange. They had already raised more than 100 million in financing, were creating a little bit of revenue, but they had a very high share price because the stock market in the US or North America believed that they were the only company out there with a technology to visualize blood flow. And they had a lot of patents. They did really good marketing, really good fundraising, essentially telling people that they were the only ones being able to do that. Right. And when I saw the share price of that company and the sales price of their product, I realized that this was going to be our angle, because we were also able to visualize blood flow compared to the Canadians that require an injection of a contrast agent, so an injection with a needle injection. We didn't require any injection, so we were purely contactless. So I knew we had a story from a technological perspective, right. And I also knew that we were at least half the price or even less expensive than those Canadians. So what I realized is that because we had a leverage to put their share price under pressure. And that is then the game we played for 2 years. I was traveling to the US once a month, talking to analysts and to investors and to physicians, educating them about what we do, essentially telling them, hey, you already know this space because you're involved with Novadac. Sure. We are coming up with a new solution that is non-invasive and less expensive. Why don't you also invest in us or support us? With the whole idea that this would put the management team at Novadac under pressure to then, to protect the share price of Novadac, and hence to put up an acquisition offer for Imago. And that is how it ultimately then 2.5 years later led to the sale of Imago. And that also explains why the Novadac management team and I never really became close friends.
Understandable.
For us, it was the only way out. When we sold Imago, Novadac already had 150 or 200 million in financing. We had 5. Yeah. Just to give you a sense for the amounts of money that would have been needed to become standalone independent.
And when we actually realized this, that, hey, this is the only way out, that we can actually also deliver a return on investment for our investors?
That I realized in autumn 11.
Okay.
Yeah, relatively soon. It then took us a lot of time to execute on the strategy for 2 reasons. First, not everyone in Imago, not every investor was agreeing with my assessment that the product itself would not sell. Okay. They didn't want to believe me, which led to a lot of infighting. They still thought that it was just my inability as a salesman and a little bit of personal games. And they also, it's not a standard strategy to go out and to play the share price when you're a 5-people company and to do that type of hedging. And they didn't believe that this strategy was going to work and hence did not support that. So I think we lost about 1.5 years of time just to get the internal stakeholders aligned, which was a lot of energy wasted.
I can imagine. And what finally convinced them about that strategy?
Only the result at the end. Okay. With some people don't even believe it today.
Okay.
But that's okay.
And what made you so confident that this was the right way to go? Because, other people might have self-doubts, for example, and if investors tell you, hey, it's actually your lack of sales capabilities to make that a success, some people might even think, oh yeah, maybe they're true, and sort of break under that pressure.
I was out there trying to sell those products myself, and I saw that this is not going to work.
Okay.
That's pretty straight. Yeah. And then when you see that the other company really has a share price that is just not justified.
How did you do that assessment to come to that conclusion?
At that time, they had maybe 12 million in revenue and about $500 million in valuation. Okay. That's an easy comparison of multiples. Yeah. That fortunately, in I believe it was in summer 2012 when the initial professor and investors wanted to fire me. We had what we call a white knight come in, an investor who then became the chairman as well, and he believed the strategy, and he put in money himself, and that saved my job, and then allowed us to work on that strategy. So it was it was a very close call.
That's a lot of pressure on you there.
It was a lot of pressure, yeah. And at one point in January 2012, I also I wanted to stop, but it was too much, and it was because people were shooting against me personally, and that was just too much. And then my coach, Retta Hartman, that I mentioned, and my girlfriend, she then supported very actively, and also my co-founder Mark from the previous company. He was very actively supporting, and then I recovered, and then it's really thanks to that white knight that we made it, and then we fought together to make the sale happen.
Wow, that's a really crazy story.
Yeah.
I would like to also talk about the execution that you then pulled off after the 1.5 years of internal negotiation about the path that you should pursue, basically. You said you flew to the United States basically once a month to make some noise and get the contacts. I can imagine this is also pretty difficult because Switzerland and the Swiss startup ecosystem with companies that they've never heard of is probably not on the US map.
What counts is when you reach out to someone that you have relevant information, then they don't care where that information comes from.
Okay.
So the first move I did is I met the CEO of Novatec. I sent him an email saying, hey, as we're going to compete, as we're in the same space, and as we're going to compete, it would be nice to meet. This is what we do. And it was a very bold email, but I had his attention immediately. Okay. And we were, at that time, no one cared about our website, so we had Google Analytics, the real-time monitoring on, and when I sent out the email, I tracked Google Analytics. And I then saw that he opened it in Toronto, and then his engineers opened it in Vancouver, and the regulatory person opened it in the US. And I knew where they were, and I saw that they were popping up and spending minutes on the website. So I knew that we had them by surprise, that they didn't know about us, because otherwise they would not have spent so much time on our website, all of them. And then I knew that we had the cards, or that we had a good momentum. And then we met a few days later at the conference in San Francisco. That's how things then started.
And what did you discuss in that meeting? What was the topic?
I was just trying to get to know him, telling him what we do, and just trying to make him understand that we can be a pain. Okay.
And how did you do that? Were there any specific tactics or information that you decided to share to make that message clear?
I told him that we were that our technology was non-invasive compared to his, and that we were much less expensive. And that already is a good first step. So I think it's always good to know the other people in your space, and to not just know the salespeople on the front line, but to know the management, the CEO. Yeah. As a CEO of a startup, even though it's just a 10-people company, you're the CEO. So you should know the CEO of the other company as well. Yeah. And usually they want to know you as well. Sure. And so there's a mutual interest, and that is where you can start. And that is also, how we, in general, I would recommend, even if you're just a small team, get to know the relevant decision makers. And if you're the CEO, don't waste much time in low ranks. Yeah. Make sure you also know the decision makers on top, because you're a CEO as well. Yeah.
It doesn't matter if the company is like 10 times bigger than you.
No, it doesn't. Yeah. Not at all. It's even better that you know them. And there's no need to go in with an ask. Go in with, hey, we are in the same space.
Okay. So
it's just
pretty neutral opening.
It's super aggressive. But it's just You can phrase it nicely.
Okay. And then what happened after the meeting?
So then he invited me to go to meet the technical team, which I then did a few months later. I went to Vancouver, met the engineers, and that is how the relationship started. Then in summer, we went over for negotiations for a potential partnership, which then failed because they themselves were in discussion of being acquired by an even bigger one. And then we also had to spend a lot of time making sure that we got more money in to finance the continued activities. And at the end of the day, so that took a couple of iterations, always with a lot of stakeholder management here in Switzerland as well, to make sure the company was going to stay afloat. We then got the clearance from the Food and Drug Administration to sell devices in the US. So these were important milestones. We started to place devices in the US with surgeons to get exposure there. And ultimately what then led them to move is their camera is based on a fluorescent agent, a fluorescent marker that you inject into the bloodstream that binds to the red blood cells. And so that then circulates all over your body. And this marker, the fluorescent marker, the molecule, is a standard molecule that is known for 60 years, so that you can buy that in a pharmacy. Where they had their patents was in the camera technology itself. But being out of an optics lab ourselves, we knew how to make that work. So what we did is we invited them over to look at our original technology, which was kind of a radar for red blood cells. But we had also purchased a Microsoft Surface tablet and added a bit of optics on the backside, and then were able to show essentially the same images with the contrast agent as well on mice, and we just showed that to them on a $2,000 tablet with another $2,000 in optics, essentially being able to do the same as their machine does that they were selling for $250,000.
Wow.
And that then triggered them to say, okay, we need to get those guys under control. They're too dangerous. And that is why they then made the offer, and we discussed the deal in mid-January 14, and then the deal closed in May 14. So 4 months of contracting back and forth. And what is interesting about that is the technology that was ultimately creating the trigger, this speckle camera that we attached to a Surface tablet. It took us less than a month to make that happen, and less than $10,000, and that was different. And so all the other engineering work we did before, the whole $4.5 million or so, $5 million invested in the original technology that we licensed from EPFL, was completely useless. It was that one decision to buy a Surface tablet and to try it out with a technology that looked, from an academic point of view, inferior, but was actually the one that was going to make it on the market.
Wow.
So that's another reason for, also in reference to the first session of our discussion, it's usually not the technology that you get from the lab that is going to make the decision at the end of the day.
You still managed all the operations, sort of, and you still had to keep the company alive while pulling all this negotiation and basically chess game in real life too in parallel. How did you manage and basically survive that? Because that's a lot of work.
The whole product development, supply chain, regulatory work was done by Mark, my co-founder. Okay. I was focusing on sales, strategy, and finance, meaning the game. So that's where we had a clear separation of concerns. And he made sure that the business worked at home, and I was out running around and trying to get money back for the investors.
Nice.
Yeah.
And then how did you actually decide about the price? Because that's also not a super easy topic to handle, I can imagine.
No, and particularly not in that setting. It was essentially it was based on we had complicated liquidation preference mechanisms in our shareholders agreement, and we knew we had to get above a certain threshold value. We had to get above 10 million for us, the founders, to also earn money. And so it was clear that it had to be north of that, and we tried to go as far as we could. But it was also clear that Novadak at the time was not being able to pay 20 million, because they again were loss making and only had like 70 million left on the bank. They could not spend too much either. So it was finding a right balance between what we needed for us to make money and what Novadak was capable to pay as a loss making business.
Are there any recommendations from your end for other entrepreneurs out there how to spot these opportunities as you did with Novadak?
Yes, I think what people always learn in everywhere in all the entrepreneurship courses is know your customer, focus on your customer. But what people usually don't realize is that you have two types of customers. You have the commercial customers, which are the ones that buy your product. Usually people know them quite well because they have been trained on focusing on their needs and their segmentations and behaviors and everything. But the second category of customers are equally important. That's the ones that do not buy your product, but buy your company. And it's really important to know them as well and to know them from the start, because if you want to sell your company, or if that is an option for your business when you start it, you need to know your landscape that you're in. You need to know the trends. You need to know how they think. You need to know the people. You need to know what they need, how they decide, what their pains are, what they're working on internally. And people sometimes, novice entrepreneurs tend to underestimate the importance of knowing this landscape as well.
So this is sort of a balance between making sure that you get the revenue in that you need to grow your business, but also have a clear positioning amongst the competitive landscape.
Acquirers do not necessarily need to be competitors. There can be other acquirers, but you need to understand both of those landscapes, or all the three: your customers, your competitors, and parties that could be interested in buying your business. Sometimes there's a strong overlap between competitors and potential acquirers. Yes.
In your case, it was clear the rationale behind the acquisition was you were a very dangerous competitor with a better technology. Are there other reasons that you see why companies acquire startups?
Fundamentally, I think there's two reasons why companies buy startups. There are synergistic reasons to have more market share, to have better operating margins, to have more revenue, whatever, just to grow. And the other reason is the defensive move, to protect what you already have, be that, again, customers or revenue or margins or whatever. Usually, psychology of loss dictates that the fear of loss is much higher than desire to gain more, meaning you're much more willing to fight for what you already have to protect your existing business than you are willing to spend extra hours a day to grow your business. And that's the same for companies. So if they already have revenue and you go and have an impact on their growth curves or their revenues or the share price, you have people's attention immediately. And then they're willing to act and react. If it's about growing, they have always other more important things going on. And so getting the attention for a synergistic deal is usually much harder than it is if you can threaten them. Now, the art is to place it in a way that it is essentially a defensive move that the acquirer can sell as a synergistic move, so that they save face. That they can show, hey, we're growing our space. We are doing that not because that little startup is threatening us, but because we are visionaries and we want to grow the business. And so that's why it is so important to position your company in a way that allows you to play that game and to enter that dynamics where you have a lot of leverage, but everyone can save face.
Is that something that you think you did well with the exit that you did? or is there something that you would do basically a bit differently in that perspective?
We would certainly have we could have played that more aggressively than we did. We could have focused on that Microsoft Surface tablet-based solution 2 years earlier and saved a lot of money. It's always very difficult to say what you could have done better, because it's easy to then in retrospect say it's always very, very hard to get it done, and it shouldn't. Selling that and playing that game, it should never be perceived as being done out of arrogance.
Yeah, right. And sort of this perspective that you took there, also the rationale and the sort of strategic analysis of the landscape, maybe potential acquirers or also competitors, is that something that you should already be very much focused on before you actually start the company, or actually when you started in the early days? Or is that something that more develops the more you the more time you spend on working on the business?
I think it's good to know it early on, because then you know that it's part of also your competitive analysis to know that space and to know people who are interested in serving the same need.
Right.
What people sometimes ignore is that a need can be served in many different ways, and people sometimes in their competitive comparisons focus only on similar technologies instead of all different ways of how a need can be solved or addressed. And I think if you do it holistically, it really helps you to understand the potential of your opportunity at hand, also how you need to protect it from an IP perspective if possible, and how realistic it is that you're going to succeed,
right,
and how much, what the beast is that you have in front of you.
You also had investors in your company. Some of them were supportive of your plans, others were doubtful and probably also wanted to go a different path. What's the role of investors when pulling such a strategy?
It's very important that that people pull that people are working towards with each other towards the same goal, because then you can spend most of your energy on solving the business challenge you have instead of keeping people aligned. So having an agreement or healthy discussions and then an agreement on how you want to approach a certain challenge is obviously very helpful to a business. If you have too much disagreement, it's a lot of distraction and a lot of wasted energy.
Yeah. And to a certain degree, I guess you also need some money to actually be able to pull that off, right?
You need to, as an entrepreneur, you constantly need to raise money and convince people that what you do is sound, and so that people put in more money. So one topic I think that people need to keep in mind is that when you are competing with another company, this company has invested energy and credibility into an internal project. And there are people who have been fighting inside that company for solving a problem in a certain way. And when you then come with a solution that is different to what they have developed internally, there's a lot of psychology at play to make sure that you can either isolate those people, meaning you need to go a hierarchy level up to convince that your approach is also sound or maybe even better. And they then need to have the willingness to fight their internal teams. Or you need to get the buy-in of those people who have initially been thinking in a way that you're going to challenge now. And that whole not invented here syndrome, or all the skin that is in the game of people that have been fighting internally for a specific approach, that can be hugely influential of the course of a business relationship. And so make sure you understand these dynamics and understand also when you interact with the company what the interest of the stakeholder of the person that you interact with is with regard to internal developments, because they can either be happy that something new is coming up so that they can promote themselves internally.
That would be great.
Which is great, but also not easy, because they still then have internal enemies.
Right.
That if company politics plays out against your favor can again be difficult for your relationship with them, or they might be able to influence that and convince superiors that despite having invested millions into one approach, another one would actually be better.
And how did you successfully do that with Novadac?
With Novadac, it was an external parameter that we influenced. It was the threat on the share price.
Yeah. So that wasn't too much of a topic then?
No. But I can imagine that now in the robotics environment with Distal Motion, where essentially every player in the space has some sort of robotics initiative, this becomes a more important topic.
Okay. And this is also a very good question. What is your future plan for Distal Motion? Do you plan to play the same game again, or do you have any other plans?
We want to make sure that Dexter is going to so that's the name of our surgical robot. Dexter is going to be successfully used in as many procedures as possible. And if the right time comes to partner, then we will obviously be open to that. But it needs to make business sense for the product and our customers, and also for our investors.
But I'm sure you're scanning and observing the strategic landscape.
We need to do that. It's important because at the end, they can be potential competitors, meaning a potential threat, or they can be potential partners. And so we need to know the other people on the dance floor.
Have you ever been in the other seat, sort of on the table, meaning that somebody attacked you with such a competitive landscape?
No, but again, we have been too small so far for this to be really relevant.
Okay. So but maybe in the future, who knows?
That's one of the challenges when you grow your business, that you need to know when the healthy time is to get out.
Right.
Because you will come under pressure at one point in time, particularly when you start to be successful. New people are going to come out, and that is probably also then closing the loop with your very first question in that session. When you're successful with your product, you still need to have enough firepower financially to defend it against new entrants. And some people have been successfully starting businesses, also here in the Swiss ecosystem. They have then been overtaken by others because they could not put themselves into the position where they said, oh, now, instead of just focusing your startup on an exit, why don't we build a business to acquire others? Right. Because then you're in a position of strength, and then you can see new technologies or new approaches emerging as something that can expand and strengthen your portfolio. But for this, you need a lot of financial firepower to pull that off. And you also need expertise on the team to be able to view the space in that way, and to have financial partners in that can help you support those types of transactions.
Do you think that Swiss companies can get there, or is this something that will rarely happen from your perspective?
It globally happens very rarely, and I don't know if it per citizen happens more often here or less often here than in the US, but it certainly takes a different mindset. It requires you to build a company, to be strong and independent, and to be able to acquire. And that means you also need to raise money for that. Right. And that's very different from just building a company to your next value inflection point with the hope that someone will buy you.
Sure.
And you're in general more successful when you have more options, meaning it's a better strategy to build a business that is then strong enough to acquire others, because then you're never with your back against the wall and you have all your options on the table. But it's a different mindset. And sometimes in the ecosystem here, we don't learn that mindset enough.
We don't think big enough.
We are more focusing on how to then exit it at one point instead of asking ourselves, what would it take for us to be the acquirer? And that is, I think, one of the great places to end up as a business when you're then strong enough to to be the one who says, well, this startup has interesting technology. Why don't we buy that?
That would be pretty cool from a Swiss startup ecosystem perspective.
There are some who do that, but it's clearly not the majority, by far not.
So think big and have big visions. This is probably also a good lesson to take away from your statement.
And have deep pockets that support your vision.
Yeah. Do you think that it's actually possible to get these deep pockets in Switzerland, or you need to go outside of Switzerland to raise?
Mostly you can get outside, but that's actually beneficial to also get the money from other European or US or Middle Eastern or Chinese markets, because that also opens new commercial opportunities.
So you would even recommend to take this step, if
absolutely.
possible?
Yeah, absolutely. It gives you more diversity also with your investor base, because you always need more money. And when you have a more diverse investor base, you can afford that one investor or two investors, either because of geography or because of the profile, it's a strategic versus financial, that they don't support the next financing round anymore, because you have enough others that still support it. And so betting on one horse is pretty bad when it comes to investors. You want to have different segments from a type perspective and geography perspective and stage perspective, because that again gives you optionality. And if you have optionality, you're never just left with one, meaning the back to your wall.
That makes sense also from a strategic perspective.
I think so, yeah.
Before we wrap up this episode, I have some rapid fire questions for you, meaning I give you 2 or 3 things to choose from. You have to choose one of them and also quickly explain maybe 1 or 2 sentences why you actually made this choice. Sounds good?
Good.
Cool. First one, United States, Europe, or China?
Commercially, it's the US. From a long-term market opportunity, it's China.
Okay. Motivation or discipline?
Motivation.
Why?
Because you need to be able to stand up every time you hit the wall.
Work-life balance or 80-hour work week?
It's a marathon, so work-life balance with a lot of commitment. But you need to be able to recover.
Yeah. Small 10-people teams or big 100-people teams?
Small 10-people teams, as long as you can.
And the last one, competition or monopoly?
Competition.
Michael, thank you so much for taking the time, and I wish you lots of success with your current project, and I hope that we can also see you playing a great game of chess in real life there.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for listening to today's episode. We hope you liked the content, and if you did, please rate us on Apple Podcast. We would highly appreciate that. Next week, we'll already be back with a new episode, a Q&A session. Check out our social media channels for handing in your questions to the topic that we will discuss next week and get them answered by top experts out of our network. If you have a burning question, that's the time to ask it and get it answered from professionals. So we hope to see you again next week for an all-new Swisspreneur episode.